Oh man, this is near and dear to my heart. From ZeroHedge.com. Just posted this today by our namesake Tyler Durden, and that's not his real name, but if you follow Zero Hedge, you'll know who this guy is. The headline is Austrian economics is no longer the unheard music. And I'm going to read this verbatim because it's fantastic. By Jeff Deist via the Mises Institute. Readers of a certain generation will remember the seminal 1980s rock band X, featured in Penelope Spheris's great documentary, The Decline of Western Civilization. Punk and alternative bands in the Tipper Gore era were struggled to get record deals, radio play, and even hire venues for gigs at their own expense. The Unheard Music, a song from the X's 1980 album Los Angeles, captures this struggle with the lyrics, "We are locked out of the public eye, no hard chords on the car radio." So a DIY ethic emerged among bands like X and Black Flag. They bought dilapidated old vans and booked their own tours on the fly, using word of mouth and sleeping where they could. I was never a fan much of Black Flag. There's a band from California called Blast, who a lot of people compare to Black Flag, and I love Blast, but Black Flag just didn't do much for me. That guy Henry Rollins became their singer, and I don't know. He just was kind of always saw as a pompous ass. But be it as it may, they're legendary for sure. They bypassed radio station executives and snuck their cassette demos into late night rotation through sympathetic disc jockeys like Rodney on the ROQ. They built their own PA boxes and printed their own T-shirts. They even created record labels like Discord, SST, very familiar with both of those, and Alternative Tentacle Records, which would go on to challenge the major studios. I'm not sure they really challenged it, but I remember SST for sure, and Discord. Memory serves, I think Minor Threat was on Discord Records, I forget. Ultimately, over time, they earned grudging respect from the music industry. They paved the way for countless local garage bands and aspiring YouTube musicians to work outside of traditional institutions and channels. There's a tortured analogy here. Austrian school economists in the U.S. once faced similar obstacles and similarly persevered to make their mark on a sclerotic profession badly in need of a shakeup. Largely shut out of the university economics departments after the Keynesian revolution of the 30s and 40s, brilliant Austrians like von Mises, which is Ludwig von Mises, and Friedrich Hayek had to find audiences and funding where they could. Organizations like the Volcker Fund and businessmen like Leonard Read made it possible for Mises and Murray Rothbard, to survive financially while producing books we cannot imagine not having today. Organizations like the Volcker Fund, and whether that's Paul Volcker, I don't know, I bet it is. Leonard Read, he had written I, Pencil, and everybody in history should read I, Pencil. Benefactors like Henry Hazlitt brought Austrian ideas to the public in the pages of the New York Times and Newsweek. Newsweek used to be an anti-commie rag, man. It's amazing how far that has come and just fallen. I don't know if anyone even reads it anymore. Popular authors like Ayn Rand produced an intellectual defense of capitalism and publicly praised Mises's human action. DIY Austrians worked their way to the edges of academia, started and published their own journals, and did end runs around the gatekeepers to reach wider audiences. And slowly, over time, they succeeded. And there's Mises, there's Rothbard, there's Hayek. We got Mises on the left, Rothbard in this. That's Hayek on the center. That's Rothbard in the center, I think, and Hayek. Who's that? Is that? I don't know. Mises, Rothbard, and Hayek. I think that's Hayek in the center there. Mises on the left. I'm not sure, actually. In the mid-20th century, the Austrian school reasserted itself in the new American home and planted a flag. Mises became a U.S. citizen. Rothbard published Man, Economy, and State in 1962, the first wholesale Austrian treatise in decades. Von Mises wrote Human Action back in the 1900s, I think, 1905 or something like that, if memory serves. Who's a guy, Siegel? Is it Bernard Siegel? And he wrote something in the 1800s, a German economist, which predated von Mises's Human Action. And I'm drawing a blank with that book because I have it in my house. It's freaking awesome. The South Royalton Conference in 1974 created a coalescence of scholars who were prepared to think of themselves as a resurgent Austrian school, including Hayek. Hayek wrote the seminal book called Economics in One Lesson. I had read that before I enrolled at George Mason. I remember going through, I had enrolled, and I was looking at the syllabus for some of the classes I was taking, and I wanted to, look, I was 22 years old, just got out of the infantry, and I never did well in academics, and I was very, very nervous, actually. And I remember I said, these kids can be so much further ahead of me, I'm going to study up. And so what I did is I bought all the books from the syllabus to read in the summertime before classes started to try to catch up. And Henry Hazlitt's Economics 1 Lesson is one I did buy, and that, to some degree, changed my life. Let's see. The Hatcher, Austrian School, we got Hayek, Rothbard, Israel Kurtzner, Ludwig Lockman, not familiar with him, and Hazlitt. The Thatcher and Reagan years brought around the rhetoric, though not the reality of market liberalism. Progress since then, particularly in publishing and academic employment for Australians, has been steady, but the digital age accelerated everything, making the great Austrian books and articles available free to anyone around the world with an internet connection. I'm telling you, you can read Leonard Read's iPencil, just type in I, comma, pencil, and it's there for all to read. It will literally change your life because it's so incredible. The ingenuity that goes into making something as simple as a pencil. Austrians today have an institutional and financial support, and Austrian PhDs work in academia, business, banking, finance, and investment houses in numbers unthinkable just a few decades ago. Of course, the Paul Krugmans and Noah Smiths and Greg Mankiws still dominate the profession. Bad ideas still dominate university economics departments, but signs of the end of that dominance are everywhere, even if those signs manifest in illiberal, populist ways economics much don't like. Austrians today are right to ask, is supposedly mainstream economics doing any good? Does it benefit society? But beyond providing sinecures, I don't know how to say that, for academics, does it accurately predict anything? Does it help us discover truth or become more prosperous? Mainstream's economists remain mired in mathematics and statistics, exactly, because Paul Samuelson. Economics in the old days was based on philosophy, and then Paul Samuelson in the MIT in the 50s and 60s, they may become dominated by mathematics and statistics. So now you might as well have a PhD in mathematics if you want to study economics, and I think that's slowly starting to change. Yet, unlike mathematicians, they fail to tell us much about the world. They view human action only in aggregates. They attempt to express economics in mathematical equations. Here, man. They criticize Mises as a literary economist. They force backward-looking data into forward-looking models, and yet perversely, all of this data and empirical testing never seem to explain the booms or the time to bust. It never explains the same anything. They have all these statistical models and mathematical analysis, yet they can't predict anything. Don't even get me started on climate scientists either, because they have this insane inability to predict stuff, but this arrogance like they can. It's nuts. The Phillips curve. That's all I'm going to say about economics. The Phillips curve, right. The dismal science is in trouble, and it deserves to be in trouble. Economic axioms cannot be flouted without consequence, which means the central insights of the Austrian school will prove correct over the coming decades. Political money will unravel. Commodity money will reassert itself. Central bankers were forced depositors into a bizarre world of negative interest rates, destroying capital and dramatically hurting savers. Central bankers, similarly, will do everything they can to avoid a stock market crash, and they'll once again buy assets and buy up and prop up equities while telling us their fiat currencies are healthy, even as they quietly buy more gold than they have in decades. Governments, businesses, investors, and individuals will respond to loose monetary policy rationally by borrowing and spending instead of saving and investing. Mergers and acquisitions, stock buybacks, and other forms of financial engineering will attempt to extract tiny amounts of value from moribund companies. Federal Reserve officials will disavow outright monetization of government spending, i.e. modern monetary theory, which MMT, which is just silliness, even as they partially practice it with an increasing debt-financed federal budget. All of this new money and credit will not be neutral, but will primarily benefit political and economic elites. The monetary alchemy, i.e. nomi prins, will not work. Consumption will not magically substitute for production. Demand-side stimulus, whether physical or monetary, will produce only ersatz and short-lived economic growth, and underlying incentives will continue to matter. Political movements in the U.S. towards greater degrees of socialism and bigger entitlements, i.e. or e.g., a single-payer government health care, will encourage the gross misallocation of resources, just as Austrians warn. Bureaucrats, far more powerful than presidents or Congress, will steer the economy based on political expediency without regard to market signals. Capitalism will be blamed for any economic crisis, whether in jobs, housing, energy, stocks, or consumer prices. Positive economists will explain everything after the fact with no acknowledgement of their own complicity and lack of foresight. Nobody wants or hopes for a severe economic contraction. Nobody wants to see people suffer from bad political and economic policies, but debt and entitlements are unsustainable. The Fed's swollen balance sheet is unsustainable. Moving towards socialism is unsustainable. Austrians will be vindicated, but will they be heard? Man, what a great article. That's Austrian economics. Start with Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. Read